Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. Together, we are the Bills, guys. This is presented by the Cover One Sports Network, and we are back at it again. Bandito comes in and says Air Raid Hour on a Thursday. That is old school.
We're back.
We're back. What's that from? We're back. Oh gosh, that's gonna bug me. What's that from? Anyway,
someone in the comments will know.
Yeah, but it's we are back on Mondays and Thursdays now because there is no pregame responsibilities on Sundays. And I'll tell you what, just getting used to it. Usually asleep by now on a Thursday night. Just kidding. But in honor of the Senior Bowl, got a coffee here in honor of Dan Campbell, head coach of the Lions.
The "we're back" thing, wasn't that what like Kelly and them did when they were coming back to the Super Bowl for like the third or fourth time in a row? They were like, "We're back." I'm pretty sure on the fourth
it might have been. Buffalo, maybe this was I have no idea. Maybe that was sort of like a poll from Buffalo Bills of yesteryear. But I got my coffee inspired by Dan Campbell. Yeah, it was Jim Kelly, says Ann Jackson 222. Yeah. So look at that. I didn't even mean to make that Bills theme.
Remembered.
Even I did. But hey, since we are back on Thursdays, it's Senior Bowl week. We are going to talk about Ken Dorsey today. We're going to talk about Joe Brady today. We're going to talk maybe we have an offensive line coach, maybe we don't. We'll talk about that a little bit. We will, and then we will get into defensive players to look out for. Not that you've probably seen some of them already with all these clips going around social media of the Senior Bowl, but defensive players to keep an eye on when you watch the Senior Bowl on Saturday. But since we are back on Thursdays, I got to start with this.
Jabroni, you are 3 seconds away, and the Rock means 3 seconds away from the Rock to lay a smackdown on your candy ass.
Yeah, I can't stop you though. You keep using this word jabroni, and it's awesome.
So right off the bat, I have a Jabroni of the week. I honestly forgot it existed until today, but the NFL Pro Bowl is my Jabroni of the week. I legitimately I remembered it existed for 1 week when Josh Allen and a bunch of Bills got snubbed, and then I forgot about it until today. And I saw a clip of Deion Dawkins blocking for Patrick Mahomes, which made you want to absolutely puke. I see Stephon Diggs. Listen, it was cool. It was cool, Stephon Diggs jumping through a table to make the catch. That was cool, but also a little bit of a heart attack. So I don't need to see that anymore from Stephon Diggs jumping through tables, catching those passes. I would say the only good thing was watching Mac Jones embarrass himself in the accuracy competition. That was fun. He couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, but my words can only go so far in terms of making someone a jabroni. I think Josh Allen made the Pro Bowl the ultimate jabroni when he snubbed them and he spurned them to go play a Pro-Am at Pebble Beach. So Josh Allen will agree with me that the Pro Bowl is this week's jabroni of the week. And I think that seeing his play out of the bunker there, I think Josh Allen might be more accurate on a golf course than Mac Jones is on a football field.
I mean, you saw the graphic, right? Josh Allen said, I'd play golf every day of my life if I could, right? So why, if you're Josh Allen, why wouldn't you turn down a meaningless game and a risk of getting injured where you got snubbed to go play Pebble Beach, one of the most iconic golf courses in the world, in a Pro-Am, in something that he loves to do? So you know what? Good for him.
But here's the thing, though. He literally he sent out this letter to the Pro Bowl, like, hey, I'm honored that you guys chose me to fill in, blah, blah, blah. But I just need this time to get my body right. So how's he spending this weekend getting his body right, playing 20 rounds of golf?
I mean,
the ultimate diss. The ultimate diss.
He's got a caddy, so it's not like he's carrying his own clubs.
Anyway, I figured that we would get right into it. Obviously, they talked about it a little bit last night on the Cover One Buffalo show with Greg Tomsett, Aaron Quinn, but I want to touch on it a little bit today.
Yeah,
Ken Dorsey, at least half a dozen teams, according to Vic Carucci, were after him with these new rules. We just saw the Giants hire Mike Kafka today. The Bears get Luke Getsy. These quarterback coaches, these position coaches are now becoming coordinators, which is nice to see. These first time, these people get an opportunity, these first time play callers. But Ken Dorsey was in demand. The Pagulas pony up. Josh Allen got his man in Ken Dorsey. What are your thoughts on the Ken Dorsey hiring as offensive coordinator?
Well, we both talked about on Monday's show how this timeline of events was really interesting, right? Because Friday evening, we're sitting here thinking Ken Dorsey to the Giants is a done deal, and then it doesn't happen. And then the more that time goes on, you're like, well, this is kind of interesting. Like the more that time goes on, you felt like he was more likely to stay with the Bills. And like I said, Monday, he's got a good agent, right? Obviously, because he's playing, probably playing these two teams off of each other. But at the end of the day, the Bills had to basically come to two conclusions, right? Number one, do we trust Ken Dorsey to be the play caller for this team, knowing Sean McDermott? That's not his thing, right? He's a defensive coach. That's not his thing. Do we trust Ken Dorsey at the helm of this offense to call plays? Yes or no? And how much are we going to weigh Josh Allen's input or endorsement on retaining Ken Dorsey? And I think the answer to both of those questions, the first question was, we do trust him and we value Josh Allen's endorsement a lot. So they obviously made the push to keep him. So I'm happy about it. Look, he's going to have to prove it, right? There is a lot of pressure on Ken Dorsey for as much as we wanted to pile on Daboll in certain situations. And we know everyone's got their moments where they're not their best. He does have big shoes to fill, considering the offense that the Bills have put out on the field the last couple of years. So there is pressure on Ken Dorsey. We don't know exactly how he's going to be. He is a smart guy, and you factor that in, Charles. I agree. He's hitching his future to Allen, and he is a smart guy, and so that's part of this as well. As the Bills feel like you never are a play caller until you do it the first time, right? So it's like everyone at some point in their life had to call plays for the first time that they've ever called plays, and this is Ken Dorsey's chance. It just happens to be on a huge stage with probably top 2 quarterback in the NFL, right? So the Josh Allen endorsement, I think, really went a long way here. And obviously the Bills saw that his services were in demand, so they ponied up.
Yeah. Chris S. comes in and says McDermott will strong arm Dorsey into running the ball more. I get where people come from. This mindset that McDermott is probably this run first dude. He's a defensive coach, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, since Josh Allen has peaked, Sean McDermott has done nothing but been pass heavy. He went out. He's been aggressive on fourth down. The Buffalo Bills have thrown the ball a ton, more than a lot of teams in the National Football League. You see him now promoting Ken Dorsey and hiring Joe Brady. He could have gone out and he could have gone out and signed Mike Shula to be his offensive coordinator, or Pat Shurmur to be his offensive coordinator, and brought in a run first vanilla offense. He didn't do that. I think that Sean McDermott shows that he wants this offense to continue to be pass first. And he has said those words in his press conferences. He's like, I don't need us to run the ball. I need us to have the ability to run the ball when we need to.
We did at the end of the season,
and
which was amazing.
At the end of the season. We're going to get to that too when we get to our offensive line coach. And I misspoke here when I said Josh Allen peaked. I mean, when he peaked in terms of he finally popped up, like he finally arrived on the stage and he started proving he was a quarterback who could throw the ball 50 times a game. Sean McDermott didn't shy away from it. Sean McDermott has never, since Josh Allen has proven that he doesn't need to be masked, Sean McDermott has never tried to mask him. You've never seen the Buffalo Bills come into a game, whether or not with the game plan of we're going to take the ball out of Josh Allen's hands. It's been an offense where the ball has gone through, and some people have criticized how much it has gone through Josh Allen's hands and how dependent they are on that one player and that one aspect of the team. But Ken Dorsey, they mentioned it last night on the Cover One Buffalo. The Earhart-Perkins system stays, so that means the language stays for Josh Allen. That's huge. Not having to learn that new language and things like that. It's huge with the receivers as well. Ken Dorsey was a quarterback, right? Brian Daboll wasn't a quarterback. Ken Dorsey was a quarterback. So now you have an offensive coordinator calling plays who was once a quarterback himself. And we're going to get to Joe Brady in a moment, a quarterback's coach who's known to be very quarterback friendly. So we got Greg Tomsett coming in saying Sean McDermott hired the Carolina OC that got fired for refusing to run the ball more. Imagine lying to yourself that Sean McDermott wants more running. Yes.
And let's not pretend like Sean McDermott has like his finger on every part of this organization, right? When it comes to game planning, whatever, like you're going to tell me that like he all of a sudden was like, well, actually for this one major part of our team, I'm not, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna meddle with that. Right. I'm going to tell him to like, no, like he sees the strengths of what he's got, and he knows that he's also a defensive minded guy, and he basically gave the reins to Daboll and Josh Allen for the offense. Now he's still going to make in-game decisions like going for it on fourth down and downs and things like that, but you will never convince me that all of a sudden Sean McDermott is going to become this super run heavy, like change his philosophy and change his that's just not how it's going to be.
We were speaking to Edgar Bennett, right? And Edgar Bennett comes from Oakland, and that is a team that very much likes to run the football a ton in that West Coast scheme, bring out a lot of 12 personnel, bring out a lot of fullback, do the play action stuff. But we said it like it would be cool if Edgar Bennett came and brought some of those principles. But it was also nice knowing that he had Mike McCarthy in his background, because the Buffalo Bills aren't going to turn into this John Gruden type of offense, and they're not going to try to force Josh Allen into like a John Gruden type of offense when this is a dude who clearly needs to be chucking the ball 35 to 50 times a football game. So that is, that is sort of, the crux. I don't think we have to worry about Josh Allen or the Buffalo Bills offense becoming too run heavy. But then I'm sure by midseason next year, we're all going to be complaining that maybe we don't run the football enough. So it'll be really interesting. We're going to get to offensive line coaching a little bit. Maybe some of the guys that we bring in as the offensive line coach, what effect that could have on the running game, because, I sort of mentioned this, right? So Ken Dorsey was the passing game coordinator. We promoted our passing game coordinator to offensive coordinator.
Right.
So you would assume that the heavy hand in the running aspect of our offense was probably the running backs coach, Kelly Skipper. But I think for the most part, it was probably Brian Daboll and it was probably Bobby Johnson, both of whom are now in New York. So I think that on top of seeing an offensive line coach, I wouldn't be surprised if on top of an offensive line coach, they went out and brought in an offensive consultant or a running game coordinator and even made an addition to the staff on top of the traditional running backs coach, offensive line coach. Because if it's this Phil Rauscher guy from Minnesota, 36 years old, young, he's only been an offensive line coach for 1 year. He was an assistant before that. If that is their guy, if that's the one they're zeroing in on, that's not a guy that you probably promote to run game coordinator because he doesn't have a ton of experience. Kelly Skipper, the Carolina guy, he's never really been like a world beater as a running backs coach. He's been there, done that, but you've never seen this guy be anything more than a running backs coach. He's also a McDermott guy. So I wouldn't be surprised if they went outside of the organization again and tried to bring in an all-encompassing type of running game coordinator, somebody who can help Ken Dorsey instill a running game. Jessica Tennis comes in and says, Mike Munchak, yeah, we all wish. But it's looking like today that's probably not going to be an option for the Buffalo Bills.
And, we had talked about, okay, Ken Dorsey getting the job as OC, would he bring in an experienced or would this person like a Doug Peterson be willing to come in and be a quarterback's coach for an up-and-coming OC? They went the other route and went with Joe Brady, obviously, who had the year of experience there in Carolina. But maybe from the running game side of the ball, if they really want to make sure they have that area covered, maybe that's where you see a guy with a little bit more experience come in if they decide to add that position, right? Because like you said, if they bring in a relatively inexperienced offensive line coach, the running game we saw at the end of the year kind of, I don't want to say took off, but it kind of did take off, right?
Yeah.
And the Bills offense got to another level when that running game was humming along with the passing game. So it will be very interesting to see if they create a position for a running game coordinator, or if they hire an experienced offensive line coach, it becomes part of that position, but we will see.
And we still got Joe Brady to talk about, but like while we're here, let's just talk about maybe the offensive line coach now. Reed coming in saying, do you think with a fresh set of eyes at offensive line coach, we will see an improvement? I feel like we still lack some talent there. And that's going to be really interesting when we talk about talent there, especially if we talk about Phil Rauscher, because the Buffalo Bills had a lot of success last year, at least late last year, with that power gap scheme and with the pin and pulls and things of that nature. It's very much a power scheme. A guy like Phil Rauscher comes from the Bill Callahan scheme. That's going back to the zone running. That's going back to sort of the stuff that the Bills did not have success with earlier on in the season. So maybe that would doom a guy like Darrell Williams. Maybe that gets a guy like Darrell Williams become a cap casualty because they don't think he's athletic enough to play guard. Maybe that puts a guy like Zion Johnson, who's blowing up the Senior Bowl, squarely on the Buffalo Bills board at 25. Maybe offensive line still is a need for the Buffalo Bills, a big need. You know, we've sort of gone away from it and we're like, well, we want an edge rusher, we want a corner. Maybe for the Buffalo Bills, interior offensive line is still squarely there as maybe the number one priority. So it should be interesting. There was a source off today, as Bruce Nolan and Aaron Quinn like to have fun with. Courtney Cronin, Minnesota Vikings beat reporter. She reported that Vikings offensive line coach Phil Rauscher was going to accept and be the Buffalo Bills' next offensive line coach. Now, Rauscher, he's got experience in Cleveland with Bill Callahan. He was the assistant offensive line coach with the Minnesota Vikings, but he was promoted to offensive line coach because Rico Dennison, former Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator, refused to get vaccinated and was terminated. But then Tom Pelissero came in and about an hour after Courtney Cronin and said, listen, Phil Rauscher has interviewed George Warhop, the Jacksonville offensive line coach, has a history with Sean McDermott. He has interviewed Ryan Wendell, the assistant offensive line coach, has interviewed. The Buffalo Bills have not made up their mind yet. It's interesting. I think Courtney Cronin is right. I think it's probably going to end up being Phil Rauscher. Tom Pelissero is down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. So my guess is he ran to a Buffalo Bills scout and said, hey, what's this deal about an offensive line coach? And the offensive line coach was like, listen, we've interviewed a bunch of guys. We haven't made a decision yet. But really that was just scout speak or front office speak when really the decision has been made. Courtney Cronin, her source is probably Phil Rauscher, who called her and said, listen, I'm taking this job. So I'm going on the assumption it's probably going to be Phil Rauscher. But it should be interesting. This guy's a Callahan protege. And the biggest thing here is now it's that wide zone, not gap power scheme. And in Minnesota last year, you're like, yeah, it was cool watching Dalvin Cook
lock it
run.
in. James Cook, lock it in.
Yeah. And they got the screen. They get the screen game going there in Minnesota.
Yeah, they do a good job of that.
But
sure.
I mean, this is a fan base in Buffalo that was screaming pin and pull, power scheme, get those big uglies out there all season long because we couldn't get this running game going. What are your thoughts on switching back to this, maybe to what looks like going to be a zone-based running scheme?
This is the thing, right? If you are an offensive line coach that's worth anything, right? You should be able to get the most out of your players, assess the players, and determine with your offensive coordinator what the best scheme will be for the personnel you have. So I 100% agree here with what Charles says. Any decent offensive line coach can teach man or zone concept based on what the OC head coach prefers. And it's really about assessing your personnel and what they excel at, right? So while the Minnesota Vikings may have had a very, athletic offensive line that was built for more of this wide zone type of scheme, they may, Rauscher may come in here and assess with Ken Dorsey and say, well, that's not really going to be the strength of the personnel we have here. Now, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden, like, this guy can't coach, gap scheme, but it is going to be, I think, more important for the Bills to feel confident that the guy they bring in to coach the offensive line is going to be able to adapt to the personnel. So to me, the adaptability to personnel becomes hugely important here, regardless of the experience. This guy has only been a full head offensive line coach for what part of one season. So that's a tall order, right? So people clamoring like to get Bobby Johnson out of here, like the grass might not always be greener here. I'm reserving judgment on this one until I kind of see how it plays out.
And all I'm going to say here too is like, Spin comes in and says, just because he runs his own scheme doesn't mean that he doesn't know how to run a power scheme. I'm totally with that. And Randy comes in and says, so we shouldn't assume O-line coach A is automatically switching the scheme from X to Z. I'm totally with you. Like, I agree with that. But there have been some interviews with Phil Rauscher where he talks about how he prefers and he thinks the zone scheme is better. You look last year in Minnesota, and this was more, again, it's probably more the offensive coordinator than it is the offensive line coach. But Cover One put up a stat, Eric, who's in the chat now, put up a stat that said that there was very little variance between man gap blocking, zone power blocking and zone blocking in Minnesota last year. It was mostly zone blocking.
Was it like 98% to 2%?
Yeah, it was pretty. It was pretty.
Us? It was
yeah,
crazy.
It was pretty crazy. I don't have the exact numbers from SIS in front of me here, but then he put up what it looked like a couple of years previous in Cleveland when he was with Bill Callahan, and there was a good mix and a good combination of the two. And Eric comes in here and says most of those years' experience were as a zone run technique angle. So a lot of people are sitting here questioning Devin Singletary's ability to run in this thing. I think a lot of the issues at the beginning of the year were the offensive line, maybe not so much the running backs. I'm not going to say that the running backs weren't missing some angles, weren't missing some cuts, but I mean, Devin Singletary is a cut, like a one cut runner, right? So he's a guy who's going to find his angles, make his cuts and go, which is something that should mesh with a zone blocking scheme. So I'm not too worried about Devin Singletary and Devin Singletary magically falling off a cliff again because he doesn't have a majority, pin and pulls and things of that nature. So I'm not too worried about that in terms of things. But I mean, Bill Callahan, one of the best offensive line coaches to ever do it. There was a story that was shared on Twitter today. Phil Rauscher, when he took the job as his assistant, Bill Callahan said, I want you to watch every single running play in the National Football League from this year. We're going to come back at the end. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. And Phil Rauscher went and he watched every single run from every single team in the National Football League. He watched film on all of it. And Bill Callahan got mad at him because he didn't watch it quick enough. So this is the kind of guy. This is the kind of guy that possibly the Buffalo Bills are going to get as their offensive line coach. So it should be interesting. And then Eric coming in and said he admitted that they did studies in Washington with Callahan about run concepts and that they leaned to zone. And I wouldn't even I'm not going to lie to you. The pin and pull stuff is cool. And I think there's a place for it. I prefer the zone running scheme. I look at teams like the San Francisco 49ers and I see the success that they have with the run game. I prefer that type of run blocking and that type of scheme in terms of trying to establish your running game. I think it's better. I just think the Buffalo Bills couldn't execute it, and that's something they got to fix.
Yeah, but the question comes down to is it execution or personnel, right? Or is it both? Right? Do you have the personnel for it? Maybe you don't. Were they just better at executing, the man gap power type plays in the pin and pulls? Maybe, right? I think like this spread systems usually pair easier with zone, exactly, and I think that why it made sense for the Bills to go that route early in the season and even last season because that spread that they were running. So for me, I think this makes the conversation around offensive line personnel really fascinating this offseason because with a guy like Rauscher, let's say, coming in, like, is he going to be the guy that's like, as a younger guy, I would imagine he's not going to be the type that's going to be so like set in his ways just because he did one thing, right? I know the tendency is to lean towards that, but as a younger guy, would he be willing to kind of be more adaptable? And that's why I keep coming back to. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the Bills will make, the Bills have options, right? And unfortunately, this is one of those things where we really can only look at what this guy's tendencies have been, what he's done before. So will that change? We will see. And I think I'm with you. It's probably going to be Rauscher based on the sources, but we don't know for sure yet. So we'll see.
Yeah. Randy Harbin comes in and says, what does that mean for a guy like Morse? We can't speak today. Morse. And Eric comes in and says that will still mix in full blocks to get him into space, the perimeter. Yeah. Like you would think like maybe like if they decide to go zone heavy, like maybe it's like a situation where, oh, well, could they try to replace, Mitch Morse? And I talked about how maybe if we go out and get a Zion Johnson the first round, maybe that moves Ryan Bates into the center competition. But I don't think the Buffalo Bills are going to make any decision to take Mitch Morse off the roster unless unless a scenario like I said plays out, where Zion Johnson comes in, gets drafted in the first round, takes over the left guard spot. Ryan Bates goes into the center competition and then just beats him out. Like, that's the only situation I can foresee. I don't think it will be a planned decision. I think, if anything, Mitch Morse might get himself an extension, which is a conversation for another day with his history of injuries, to lower that cap hit, because he's got a pretty significant cap hit. Steve Lynn, I love your optimism here. He says they can develop Cody Ford probably be a huge win. We're not going to touch on that, but hey, I love the optimism there. I really do love the optimism. Quickly before we get to the Senior Bowl, Joe Brady, William & Mary connection. To me, this is the Josh Allen effect. He came to Buffalo it wasn't because of his William & Mary connection to Sean McDermott. He came to Buffalo to coach Josh Allen, right? This is a guy who knows that Ken Dorsey had like 11 offers to be an offensive coordinator. He chose to stay in Buffalo. So what's going to happen to Ken Dorsey after this season? He's likely going to be just like Kellen Moore and all these other hotshot offensive coordinators, Kevin O'Connell, interviewing everywhere next year, probably going to take a job. Joe Brady can slide right into that OC role, and then he can be him in 2 years. So Joe Brady sees this as his sort of redemption arc, and he chose our quarterback to be that redemption arc. So this is 100% the Josh Allen effect. And
I mean, look at what he had. Look at what he was dealing with in Carolina, right?
Oh,
I mean, this is
from Sam Darnold and Cam Newton to let's not disparage the great Philip Walker too much, but
oh my God.
But from Sam Darnold and Cam Newton to Josh Allen, that must be a nice step up for Joe Brady. Joe Brady's going to get to practice.
But this is what happens with fired coaches all the time, right? They have to rehab their image, right? They have to rehab their I guess if you're like really, really like established, maybe you don't. But like for guys like Joe Brady, who've been in the NFL, on and off, obviously he was in the NFL, then went back to LSU, then back to the NFL. Like it's a chance for him to rehabilitate his, resume, if you will, right? It was a failure in Carolina last year. Didn't even make it through the whole season. Was he the scapegoat? That's a whole other conversation. Fine. But he's now got a chance to rehabilitate his image, and it's a great spot for him to do that, right? Because he doesn't have the pressure of being the offensive coordinator, but he gets to kind of hitch his wagon to Josh Allen and the success of Josh Allen. So to me, it's a win-win situation for the Bills to get a guy like Joe Brady on the staff, but also a win for Joe Brady to parlay this into a better gig down the line. So I'm with you on that.
And I just remember after the New England game, me and you sat here at the top of the show and we're like, can we think of another playoff performance like that Josh Allen just had? Can we think of a better quarterback performance in a playoff game? And we were sitting here, and the only thing I could come up with that I could think of was the absolute heater that Joe Burrow went on in college football when he beat up and threw like 15 touchdowns and no interceptions in the SEC championship and the 2 college football playoff games in college. And we now have the architect of that historic Joe Burrow LSU offense in Joe Brady. He's still young, 32. He became an offensive coordinator probably too soon, had that responsibility too soon. Now he gets to take
that's
a step
how he
back.
got the job, right?
Yeah, yeah. And he wasn't even the full-time play caller. He was the passing game coordinator. He sat in the booth with a more experienced offensive coordinator when he was at LSU. So probably too much on his plate in Carolina. He gets to take a step back now. What I like about it is now the offense has a chance. I'm no longer concerned about the offense plateauing, right? We could have easily maybe finagled Shea Tierney, or Sean McDermott could have went out and got like a guy that he knows in Mike Shula. We could have promoted like Davis Webb or convinced Davis Webb to be the quarterback's coach. We could have just had the same exact minds or similar minds in the room and just ran it back again. But one of the issues you see in the National Football League is if you don't adapt, if you don't evolve, people are going to catch up to you eventually. So now the Buffalo Bills bring in this different mind, this guy who understands spread concepts and spread ideas, and he just brings some new ideas to the table. So I really like this idea of possibly evolving our offense even more with some input from Joe Brady.
With some info from Joe Brady and maybe some ideas Ken Dorsey has that he wasn't able to kind of, fully get implemented because he wasn't the offensive coordinator, which I love about how the Bills have approached this side of the ball so far in the offseason with losing Daboll is they have, in my mind, had a very nice blend of retaining continuity at the top of the house in the sense of promoting Ken Dorsey from within, but then bringing in fresh minds sort of underneath, like you said, with Joe Brady. And obviously there will be a new offensive line coach. So I think it's a really nice blend of potential new ideas and the same language, like you said, for Josh Allen when it comes to the terminology. So to me, this is a perfect sort of way to get new ideas in the building without completely starting from scratch, right? You have the same terminology. You got Ken Dorsey there, up and comer, going to call plays for the first time. You got Joe Brady coming in. So to me, I think the evolution is there, but it's not like a wholesale, like flip this thing on its head. Why break something that's not broke, or why fix something that's not broken, as they say, right? So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I think is the official saying, but you get where I'm coming from here on this.
And speaking of people who don't like it when the Buffalo Bills run the ball too much, or they don't like it when the Buffalo Bills run the ball on early downs, an interesting stat here that was found by Chris Trapasso over at CBS Sports when he was at LSU in that historic season that the LSU Tigers had under Joe Burrow and Joe Brady. They had the third most first down passes of any team in college football. So of all the teams in college football, they threw the third most on first down, and that offense led the NCAA in first down. So they moved the chains there, and they used the analytics, and they were very pass happy on first down. So no need to fear when it comes to that. All right, we're going to transition now to the Senior Bowl. But before we do, if you are watching this show live, smash that like button for us. If you appreciate what it is you are currently listening to, make sure you smash that like and share this thing. Let people know where they can find us here at the Air Raid Hour, and they can come join this party every Monday and Thursday nights. If you happen to be watching this on demand, like you're not listening to this live, I'm live right now, so I'm going to get a little meta here. If you're listening to this on demand, like an hour later or tomorrow morning, make sure not only do you smash that like, help us out a little bit, but leave a comment in the comment section. Dave and I always make sure that we are in the comment section the day after, 2 days after, 3 days after, answering any questions or reading the comments and things like that. So if you're watching on demand, leave us a comment. And if you happen to be listening to this in auditory form, which I have no idea why you want to look at our beautiful faces, but if you're listening to this thing in auditory form on iTunes, Spotify, whatever, make sure you're leaving a 5-star, you're leaving a review, smashing that subscribe button for us. All right, time to get into the Senior Bowl. Before we get into defense, I want to talk a little bit about offensive prospects that have been popping. And to do our Senior Bowl talk today, we're going to bring on our man, Randy Hardman, to do a little Senior Bowl talk with us. So how you doing today, Randy?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey, listen.
The man, the myth, the legend.
It is the off season, right? It is the off season, but I think we all, as Bills fans who were hardened by a 17-year playoff drought, the off season we have learned can be a very fun time, especially for roster construction nerds like ourselves. So let's dig into it. And Randy, I'm going to start with you. You've had a chance to be scrolling social media the past couple of days. You're connected. I know that you are just hooked up and you are watching it like crazy. Who are some of the offensive players you think in this Senior Bowl that you have seen that are really sticking out?
Well, I mean, in this particular Senior Bowl, I think a lot of the talk is going to the quarterbacks, which doesn't really interest me this year.
And it won't for the next 20. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a long time before we're going to be looking at that. In terms of the wide receivers, there's some interesting players. I think your guy Romeo Doubs has had a good week so far. Khalil Shaker was a big winner for today, day 3. And then some of the tight ends. My guy Kohler hasn't been getting a whole lot of press. He did get put on his ass in one of the blocking drills I saw today, which was disappointing. But Trey McBride has been as advertised this week. I think if you kind of go through many of the different arrow up, arrow down columns, you'll see that McBride has consistently been a winner all week. Which kind of lines up with what we heard about the Bills kind of being interested in him and had gone to some of his games. So running back wise, I heard that Jerome Ford equated himself well. Not great in the passing game, but has taken advantage of his running game reps. And that's about it. I mean, the offensive linemen have been solid. Kennard's been good. He had a good back and forth with Johnson from Florida State. I think that was day one, at the end of day one. And Zion Johnson has been solid all week. So,
yeah, I mean, there's just been a ton. And ever since the Joe Brady news, I've just had like flashes of wide receivers like rolling through my head. I don't know. I'm feeling very Madden-y right now. Now that Ken Dorsey is our quarterback's coach, or our offensive coordinator, and Joe Brady is our quarterback's coach. I want to go back to Romeo Doubs, and I want to talk to you for a second here, Dave. Romeo Doubs is a guy that you talked about, a guy that you were really intrigued with.
Yep.
Very much a deep threat at Nevada, but he's showing he had this great catch in the red zone over top of defender, got both legs in. He's showing short area quickness and being able to separate the line of scrimmage on some of the shorter routes. Romeo Doubs' stock is on the rise at the Senior Bowl. Talk about Romeo Doubs a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned him on Monday because I was like super intrigued by some of the games I watched from him. Was able to watch a couple of those Nevada games. Obviously, I talked a lot about Nevada players on Monday, so clearly I watched a bunch of Nevada games. But one of the things I think that gets overlooked with him, yes, he is a speed threat and he's a great boundary kind of deep threat, but he is able to break down his routes differently from what I've seen from other guys. Like his ability to kind of break down, fight back towards the football, fight towards the sideline on these deep dig routes or these deep curl routes is something that I think goes overlooked with him. And if you watch some of those Nevada games, it's an element of his game that is actually quite good. Now, his route tree isn't the most diverse, if you will, but his ability to break down and kind of put himself in position to make a play on the ball with his hands and come back to the ball and help his quarterback out is something that really impressed me in watching some of those games. And by the way, on top of that, like we already said, he is a deep threat on the boundary. So Romeo Doubs is someone who's had my attention very early on in this process, and I would not be surprised to see him have a nice game at the Senior Bowl. His stock continue to rise a little bit. He's got the size. He's 6'2", 200, so it's not like he's lacking physicality. So you just wonder, can he develop that route tree a little bit more? But man, impressive dude physically.
Hey, yeah, Dave, real quick, doesn't that sound exactly like what we were saying about Gabe Davis 3 years ago? I mean, he was a deep threat guy at UCF, kind of a one or two routes.
It does in that sense. I don't know that Gabe Davis was as physical as Doubs, but I see where you're going with that, Randy. I definitely see where you're going with that, but it is fair because we did say that about Gabriel Davis. I mean, Steve and I will be the first to admit when after that draft happened, we were more excited about Isaiah Hodgins immediately following the draft than we were Gabriel Davis, and it turned out Gabriel Davis just was an absolute steal.
Yeah, so, I mean, you weren't alone. I was too.
I mean, I think a lot of people were, right? And I'm willing to admit it. I think we're all willing to admit it. But what I think is a little bit different about Doubs is he seems a little thicker and he seems a little bit more physical at the point of attack. So we will see. I definitely
that's a bonus in my book.
Yep. Yeah, we got speaking of boundary receivers, a guy that we talked a little bit about in the last show who's apparently having, according to most people who are there, having the best Senior Bowl of all the receivers, Christian Watson from North Dakota State, 6'5", 205 pounds, 4.4 speed, might even be better than 4.4 speed. He is showing great short area quickness in the red zone, getting open, running routes. He's a guy who returned kicks and punts at North Dakota State at 6'5", 210 pounds. A guy who did some Debo Samuel type of stuff at North Dakota State at 6'5", 205 pounds. Christian Watson is literally blowing up the Senior Bowl right now. And he's a guy who might have been a fourth round pick who now Christian Watson could be in a conversation in the second round. So Christian Watson is a boundary guy who might also have some slot flex, who's really impressed people in Mobile. We got Charles G coming in talking about Charlie Kohler, and as Randy mentioned, the only Charlie Kohler clip I've seen is him getting blown up on that one play, trying to pass protect, and
a little bit of Randy died on that.
You know who is getting some good reviews? Greg Dulcich, my guy from UCLA. looking good in pass protection, run blocking, made a couple of nice catches down the field. So my boy, I'm gonna shout out my boy Greg Dulcich making a couple of plays. I think Greg Dulcich's stock is on the rise. And if he sucks, at least we have a new nickname for him. Is on the rise, and he could end up being a Dawson Knox late 3rd rounder or an early day 4 guy. As I was predicting, even though he was on the TDN board 6th, 7th round, he's on the PFN board in the 7th round. I don't think that's going to happen. Charles G comes in, says, who's the kid from UF? That's Dameon Pierce, a guy that I was, led on to like late in the process. Think about Dameon Pierce, physical, downhill. Dan Campbell was sitting there getting his jollies off, watching him in pass protection at the end of practice. So, he's a Dan Campbell grit type of guy. Here's my issue with Dameon Pierce. He just reminds me so much of Zach Moss, right? If Zach Moss wasn't on the Buffalo Bills roster, if Thanos snapped his fingers and Zach Moss like withered away, I would be all on the Dameon Pierce train. But we already have that type of running back on our roster, and I do think the Buffalo Bills are going to give Zach Moss one more year. I think the trait they are looking for is speed. Silas Whittle coming in saying, if we have to choose between Jones from UConn or Dubs from Nevada, based on our roster, who is the priority? I'm going to go with here's what I will say, and I'll let you guys, comment. You could probably get the best of both worlds and get Jones from UConn in the 2nd round and Dubs from Nevada in the 3rd round. And that's why I'm going with Travis Jones, because this guy is legit. Like, he is the higher graded prospect. He's the better player of the two. Like, Travis Jones is a better defensive tackle than Romeo Doubs is a wide receiver. And he's a better prospect, a much higher rated prospect, I think, by probably 30, 40, 50 players in this class. So I'm going with Travis Jones, who is him, Jeremiah Johnson, and Zion Johnson, Malik Willis. These guys are the talk of Mobile this week. And I mean, Travis Jones is just this guy. He's played 0 tech this week. He's played 1 tech this week. He's shown A-gap power. Joe Marino is raving about him. Anyone with a pulse in Mobile was raving about the way Travis Jones could operate. And despite how big and powerful he is, he's still nimble and could even probably play some 3 tech as well. So I'm picturing that dude next to Ed Oliver, and that's what's getting me all types of Dan Campbell excited watching that and thinking about that. I don't know, Dave, what are your thoughts on Travis Jones or your boy here, Romeo Doubs?
It is really hard for me to say this, but I think that given we don't have Harrison Phillips for sure back in the mix yet, knowing what we know now, what's the future of Star? We don't know. He's probably going to be back, but what is he going to really bring you at this point? Ed Oliver's really the main guy you have in the mix there. I mean, I hate to say it, but I'd probably go with a defensive tackle as well, just knowing what we know and just knowing that the depth of that position for the Bills right now is hurting. I'm not saying by any means that the Bills shouldn't be considering a wide receiver in this draft, because that position for the Bills is actually probably a sneaky need for them here in the next, year or two, or even right now. But it would be really tough for me to pass on the defensive tackle in that situation, as much as I love Doubs.
What about you, Randy? What do you think in this Doubs-Jones debate here?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we like talking about wide receivers, a guy like Romeo Doubs more than likely is coming in as the wide receiver 4. So for me, I'd be inclined to go with Jones. However, you could look at a guy like John Ridgway later on and take a bigger or a better wide receiver prospect than Doubs earlier. So like in a lot of simulations that I run, if you have a choice between like a corner or taking like Travis Jones at 31 trying to trade down, you might be better off just taking like Johan Dotson at 25, because he's going to a guy like that should, in theory, immediately come in and challenge for a starting spot and give you more than a wide receiver 4 that you might be getting in round 2, 3, 4, or more than a rotational defensive tackle. But if it's between the two, give me that rotational defensive tackle that can play the 1, possibly 2 gap, somebody like that. I would take Ridgway later, actually, instead of Jones, though. Just mitigate some of the risk.
Yeah, and then to me, Silas Whittle says, like, could Travis Jones end up being a first round pick? he's playing like a first round pick, just like a guy that I wanted at 25, Jermaine Johnson, is now looking like he could be top 15.
Yeah.
Mobile will do that to you. And we've heard these conversations. I still remember to this day listening to Matt Miller's podcast back when he was doing the podcast with like Connor Rogers and stuff. He's like, man, these scouts, he said what was so weird about COVID is these scouts were all on their own, right? So the Bill scouts, the Jet scouts, the line, they were all on their own, and they were scouting these guys in an isolation chamber, and their thoughts were their thoughts, and nothing really, no one was really there to sort of sway them one way or another. But you get to Mobile, you get to the bar at night, because it's very much a networking scene there too. In Mobile, these guys start drinking, these guys start spewing stories like where they think guys should go on boards, et cetera, and when you hear other scouts' opinions of guys, your opinion of guys start to change, or you start to go and you start to look at something differently, and you start to have this like conforming opinion as opposed to 20 or 30 multiple isolated opinions. You start to come to these consensus opinions. And if a guy like Travis Jones blows up Mobile, enough people are out there in the bar afterwards, enough scouts are up, that guy looks like a first round pick. That guy looks like all of a sudden, a team who really liked Travis Jones hears all that chatter, hears all those scouts talking and raving and can't shut up about Travis Jones. They might reach higher than they would have originally reached for a guy like Travis Jones. So to me, Travis Jones could easily be a first round pick. And we talked for months, Randy, me and you, about how weak this defensive tackle class was. But hot damn, if not in the last month, there have been some dudes.
It's heating up.
It's heating up. It's heating up early though, right? So Jordan Davis, obviously, he's not at the Senior Bowl, but he's posting these absolute freakish workout videos on Twitter, getting everybody all thirsty with what he's doing in his offseason workouts and his preparation for the NFL draft. Then you have Devontae Wyatt blowing up the Senior Bowl, maybe not to the extent that Travis Jones is, but Devontae Wyatt's having
how
a good
spoiled
week.
was Georgia, man? How spoiled was Georgia this past? Goodness.
Fidarian Mathis from Alabama, Eric Turner's dude. Eric loves Phil Mathis. He is having himself a nice, solid Senior Bowl. He had himself a solid Perion Winfrey, who's got some off the field stuff. I'm not as high on him because I think he's more a 3-tech, and I'm looking for bigger, beefier guys. You mentioned John Ridgeway having a good week. Neil Farrell from LSU.
By the way,
Ogbinia from UCLA, 325 pounds. There are some dudes who are showing up here now.
Ridgeway has the best nickname.
What's his nickname? I didn't hear it.
He calls himself. All right, so we have Horrible Harry, right? Ridgeway, who reminds me a lot of Phillips, calls himself the Vanilla Gorilla. I heard that today when I was watching the recap. I was like, that is awesome. That is great.
Mm-hmm.
So if you got Horrible Harry and the Vanilla Gorilla inside, I think that's pretty good.
And that speaks to our defensive tackles, right? So Zimmer is an RFA. Phillips and Butler are UFAs. So technically the only roster defensive tackles on the Buffalo Bills team right now are Ed Oliver, Star Lotulelei, who, despite the fact that a lot of people want to cut him, he's not going to get cut. I can see him getting cut in training camp post June 1st if he gets to camp and other guys outperform him. I can see the Bills pulling the trigger and cutting the cord, but I think he's at least getting to training camp. And then it's Brandon Bryant. So to me, the Buffalo Bills are going to be in the market for not just one defensive tackle, but possibly, depending on Zimmer and Phillips, multiple defensive tackles the Buffalo Bills are going to be looking to add this offseason. Wouldn't be surprised if guys like Travis Jones, Fidarian Mathis, Devontae Wyatt are right there on their radar in the second round. And if guys like John Ridgeway and Neil Farrell, once we get into the third or the fourth round, start to get onto the Buffalo Bills radar. But to me, and I want your guys' opinion, I'm looking for a guy who is run stop first, mostly a 1-tech, but I do want a guy who's flexible enough to can sort of play the 3-tech a little bit in a pinch, right? So sort of that 1-tech, 3-tech flex. I'm not looking for the 350-pound guy unless that guy is Jordan Davis. What are your thoughts? Dave, let's start with you. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I would tend to agree, and that's why I kind of have gravitated towards Jordan Davis's teammate there and Devontae Wyatt. He's the guy that stands out to me as that type of player who could kind of play either position. He's got some of that lateral mobility. He's got the size. He's nearly 320 pounds. He's the guy I look at that if the Bills maybe want to invest early in a guy that can stop the run, can add a little bit to your line from a versatility standpoint, slide over when needed. Devontae Wyatt is the guy that kind of stands out to me. And I mean, at this point, again, you could see that being a situation where if he's kind of sitting there, on the board as sort of that maybe late second round grade, and the Bills feel like that he's not going to make it to them, do they pull the trigger on a guy like that in the first round? It would be quite a reach, but man, he to me is fitting the mold for kind of the guy I'm looking for.
And Travis Jones and Devontae Wyatt too are both these classic cases of, and people have been having this conversation on Twitter the last couple of days. A player can be good and not be a first round pick, right? Like you can like a player, you can love a player, and that doesn't mean that they are a first round pick. Like I was getting an argument with Casey Reed. Like I always get an argument with Casey Reed. He was making fun of me because he said, I don't like Lasita Smith from Virginia Tech, when I don't mind Lasita Smith from Virginia Tech. I just think he's a third, fourth rounder. And Casey took that as some kind of disparaging comment, jokingly took that as some kind of like disparaging hate. But it's interesting, right? Like Devontae Wyatt and Travis Jones were not in the first round conversation, I think, for the most part. I heard Matt Miller before the Senior Bowl mock Devontae Wyatt in the first round. Neither of these guys were really, Wyatt more than Jones, were really in the first round conversation. And then all of a sudden Mobile happens and they are. Typically, I would say slow your roll, right? Like this, it's just a bunch of scouts. These guys aren't the decision makers. A lot of people trying to blow smoke, et cetera, et cetera. But I think with these two, the first round talk is legitimate. I really do think with Travis Jones and Devontae Wyatt, this first round talk is legitimate. But Randy, what are you looking for in the defensive tackle room for the Buffalo Bills to add?
I mean, I tend to agree with what you guys mentioned. I think traditionally you're looking for somebody that's going to stop the run and offer some pass rush ability. I mean, I love inside pressure, somebody that can collapse the pocket from the inside and force the quarterback off his spot. That opens up more ability for a pass rush. So, it's a little bit of a catch-22. I want somebody that can create pressure, but at the same time, there's nothing that replaces a good run stuffer. I tend to like using that for the middle rounds, and a guy like Ridgeway in the third, same place as Harrison Phillips, basically. You get two guys that can rotate in and do essentially the same thing. And I think it offers value, and it allows you to use your first 2-round picks on more immediate impact players as opposed to a rotational piece.
Can I say it seems like we had the same conversation last year, right? With guys like Elam McNeil and Tyler Shelvin and Kaiir Tonga. Like we're like, okay, the value for like a guy like this is going to be in like the middle rounds, and then like the Bills just completely bypassed addressing it at all, like during the draft, right? So it's like I feel like I agree with Randy that the value is probably in the middle rounds, but are the Bills even going to address this position in the draft? Because we thought they were last year and they didn't.
And that's a great part of the conversation is that, we love all these prospects, but there's only a finite number of picks that we have, and there's only a finite number of picks in the first round, second round. And, I feel like sometimes, and, I've joked around with Judge about this, is that he likes everybody. So you say, this guy's a first round pick, this guy's a second round pick. The truth of it is that, some of these guys that we think are going to be higher round picks are not. And it's going to be odd to see him fall. ASJ last year was a great example. Or the hometown boy, what's his name, from Syracuse that everybody wanted to take high and end up slipping 2-3 rounds. Yeah, Melifonte. So, I mean, and that's why this part of the year is so much fun, because people get invested in players that ultimately, slip or go way too high.
We got Silas Whittle coming here and says, give me a draft with Travis Jones, Kyler Gordon, Brian Asamoah, Christian Watson, and I'm going to be in a climactic euphoria until OTAs. He's gonna feel the same way Dan Campbell feels when he watches an Oklahoma drill. That is how Cyrus Whittle's gonna feel. And those are all four. I love all four of those players because I love every one of them. There are players that I don't like. I'm just afraid to say I don't like them because they'll probably end up being good. But I'll tell you what, someone earlier said, it seems like this time of year, there's 50 guys that we talk about as first rounders. And that's the thing is like, there are dudes that I like straight up fall in love with. I'm falling in love with Travis Jones, fall in love with Devontae Wyatt, fall in love with Kaiir Gordon. So Kaiir Gordon could very well just be a second round pick, right? He could very well be a second round pick, but it only takes one team to fall in love with the dude for him to be a first round pick. And for me to go, gosh darn it, why didn't they take him in the first round? Kaiir Gordon is the perfect player for the Buffalo Bills. Everything about him and his scouting report is amazing. And I am number one in the Kaiir Gordon fan club, and I'm getting everyone on that fan club, including Pro Anth. He's doing a lot of film study on Kaiir Gordon. But I think the reason why people have 50 guys on the first round draft board is because, you know, NFL personnel guys, when doing interviews and stuff, talk about this all the time. They're like, well, we only had 19 first round picks on our board. Like, we only thought 19 guys were really worthy of a first round grade. That's severely lower than 50. But when you add up the cumulative, all 32 NFL teams first round boards, because they're not the same, you're going to have more than 32 names. Because there are some teams who are going to have a first round grade on someone that another team doesn't. So when you're trying to project who's going to draft where they're going to go. Yeah. Like everyone thought Rashad Penny was like, that would be a great value pick at the end of the second round, or that would be a steal at the end of the second round. Boom. Seattle Seahawks. And it only took him up until 3 weeks before his rookie contract was up for him to finally explode. So kudos to the Seattle Seahawks.
The Seahawks are notoriously good at drafting too.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let's shift the conversation now. Since we're talking about defensive line, let's shift it to edge rusher. Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, F.A. Obata, free agents. Gregory Rousseau, Boogie Basham, A.J. Epinesa, both second and first round picks. We should be set there, but we're not. And then you also have Mike Love, who I'm high on. I think he could make the roster next year, and Brian Cox Jr. still on the roster as well. Where do the Buffalo Bills go from here at defensive end? Randy, I'm going to start with you since I started with Dave last time.
Well, you know, I'm probably going to end up sounding a little bit like a broke record when it comes to this particular program, because they have a lot of high-quality players, one of which is Majai Sanders, Cincinnati Bearcat. You know, he was quoted as saying this week that he's out there to prove that he's a three-down player and not just a situational pass rusher, you know, starting right off the rip. And you got to love that attitude. I think he offers a lot. He offers a little bit of a bend that maybe we don't have right now with the current crop. So I'm excited for him to see how he translates to game day Saturday. And the other one that's been making the noise this week, there have been some other guys that have done a little bit, but the other one is the big cock, Inigbari, the Gamecock. He has been beating people up all week, putting people on their backs, and using that speed to power, and just you know, just doing a great job, making us all proud here down in South Carolina. So those are the two ones that I've been noticing and reading about all week. I know what's the guy's name from UCLA? It's got Agbania. Is that right?
Yeah, he's a defensive tackle though.
That's right. Yeah, he's a defensive tackle. So yeah, those are the two main ones that I've been paying attention to this week is Enigbari and Majai Sanders from Cincinnati.
Yeah, we got Steve Lynn coming in here. He says, how solid is the Bills board right now? Shane said he knows our board up to the fourth round this early. And I don't know if you've ever heard this before, Steve, but Brandon Beane has made this comment multiple times. The Bills draft board is set in like December. Like they've made the comment multiple times that before they get to the Senior Bowl, their board is set. And then when they get to the Senior Bowl, that's when their eyes open up and they start to move guys up and down based on what they see. But for the most part, their board is set based on game film, which they think is most important. Then they get to the combine. And once they get to the combine and see guys' measurements and see guys' agility drills and see guys 40 times, then they go back and they rewatch the game film and see if there's anything they missed. So really, they do their homework and they turn in their assignment. They turn in their assignment in, you know, early January, but they use the Senior Bowl. They use the combine to sort of check their work, to go back and double and triple check their work. And they might make some changes to their boards, but I honestly wholeheartedly believe Brandon Beane when he says that their board is a majority set when they get to the Senior Bowl, because I've seen him, you know, within that Matthew Fairburn sit down, talk about Devin Singletary, and the way that Brandon Beane wanted to whip his junk out in the middle of that interview, talking about Devin Singletary's game film, tells me that that dude was in love with Devin Singletary before he ever saw him run a 4.66 40, right? So that to me tells me all you need to know about where Brandon Beane's priorities are and when his board is set. I think was that interview. But Dave, what are you looking for at edge? And I know, I'm so mad that Jermaine Johnson could be out of the Bills' range now.
I know. And Jermaine Johnson is obviously the guy that stands out, right? Because he had the sort of unceremonious start to his career, made the transfer to FSU, and obviously kind of blew up that final year with the 11.5 sacks. So he is definitely getting a lot of the attention right now. But if you're talking about, what kind of player I'm looking for, it's like, okay, let's think about what the Bills have invested in the last few years and sort of what they've already had on the roster, right? From a draft standpoint, they've invested in guys like AJ Epinesa and Gregory Rousseau, bigger guys, outside of obviously the whole weight situation with Epinesa, but him coming back to weight, Gregory Rousseau being this long and lengthy guy. Do the Bills look for a bendier type of edge rusher to complement Rousseau, figure out what they're going to do with Epinesa now that Jerry Hughes is technically off the books, right? And so I think to avoid redundancy in the room, you probably do want to look for a guy who's got a little bit more pass rush skills. Maybe they're not the best against the run, but they offer you something. They offer you something more from pass rush standpoint. So the guys that kind of like stand out as having those type of traits to me are guys like Majai Sanders from Cincinnati, and even a guy from a smaller school like D'Angelo Malone from Western Kentucky, who's probably more of a 3-4 edge rusher, but had unbelievable production at Western Kentucky throughout his entire career off the edge. Now, are the Bills willing to kind of go for a guy that's like that light at 240, 250? I don't know. But I mean, Jerry Hughes for the better part of a decade has pretty much been playing at what, 250, 255?
Yeah.
So something like that isn't out of the realm of possibility if you really want to spark the edge from a pure pass rush standpoint. And that's clearly what a lot of Bills fans are clamoring for right now.
And, we have been to Virginia Tech several times this year, so Barno might be an option too in the later rounds. You never know.
And that's the thing too. I love Amari Barno. But that's the thing too, is you would think the Bills, based on like what they've been drafting the past couple of years, that it's going to be guys like Logan Hall, or it's going to be guys like
or
Jermaine Johnson or Josh Pascal, who I'm giving Jonathan
like Cameron
Franklin
Thomas,
Myers.
the dude's massive, right? Like, those types of guys.
Who ducked out of the Senior Bowl. I don't know what his reasons were, but I think that dude's Max Crosby light. Like I really do like Cameron Thomas, who's a bigger guy, but normally I would say guys like Majai Sanders or Boy Mafi from Minnesota, who's having a really good week, or guys like Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State, who's having a huge week. Russ Brown loves him. Kingsley and Igbari, as Randy mentioned, the Gamecock, Amari Barno. I think that those guys could legitimately be on the Buffalo Bills radar because Jerry Hughes is coming off the board. And I do think we need some bendier guys, even if it means that we got to have guys standing up more. Like, I love David Ajobo. Like, people who watched me on Twitter on Monday when I dropped my mock draft, traded Tremaine Edmonds to get up into the top 5 because I was feeling frisky that morning. Mostly, I just wanted to talk about David Ajobo, how much I love David Ajobo. He's a dude who I would really like to get in a Bills uniform. You'd probably have to get ahead of the Baltimore Ravens at 14 to even touch him, because the Baltimore Ravens now have Michigan's defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald. But I don't care if we got to stand dudes up. Go get me those bendy edge rushers. Look, go find the Josh Allen of your defense, right? Like we talked about on this show, that you have to get these bendy edge rushers who can get to the quarterback and they can finish. They have the athleticism to finish. How many times do we watch Mario Addison try to chase some guy to the sideline and he, the guy gains 4 or 5 yards, Patrick Mahomes, when it should have been sacked for a loss, or the quarterback should have had to revert back the other way and get forced into a bad throw or forced into a sack. We got to get some athleticism on the edge. We got to get guys who can finish on the edge. I'm all for taking one of these bendy dudes.
And that's why I wouldn't, if it's me, I wouldn't rule out a guy like D'Angelo Malone just because of his size, right? The dude is just like an absolute monster. 59 tackles for loss in his career, 32.5 sacks. I know it's Western Kentucky, but the dude knows how to get to the quarterback and he knows how to get in the backfield. So if you can find a way to make that work. And yeah, go ahead, Randy.
I mean, I agree with you, but based on the history, Brandon Beane seems like a size queen, man. Like he's all about.
I know.
Like big.
He's never going to draft D'Angelo Malone. He will never draft him, but I like him.
Yeah,
like Cameron Thomas could be an option, right? I mean, that's like these guys that are size, but like they got Rousseau, right? They got their big guy that they had length and strength last year. They still don't know what to do with AJ Epinesa. Addison and Hughes are going to be out the door. Like, what do you have from a pass rush standpoint? Like a true pass rush standpoint, getting to the quarterback,
a finesse standpoint.
Are you expecting Gregory Rousseau to be that guy? Because
no,
I think that's a tall task for him. I think that's a tall task for him. I don't think that's
he's
fair
a slappy.
for
He's a slappy edge rusher. As
I mean, I agree. We don't have that guy on the roster, but I'm just saying, and you know what I'm saying is with Brandon Beane's history, he hasn't shown that he's going to go away from tendencies so far.
Yeah.
Like he's all about these big physical freaks, and then kind of making them, fit into the system, or making them, earn their way in. Tremaine Edmonds, Josh Allen, Gregory Rousseau. It's been a tendency of his that we've noticed so far. So we'll see if he breaks it or if he does something different.
And Claude coming in with, these are the two guys who have for the most part stolen the show at the Senior Bowl. The consensus top two have been Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State. Will the Bills finally draft a Penn State guy with those Pagula connections? And Jermaine Johnson at 6'4",
Don't turn into Aaron Maven, please.
I mean, Ebiketie, the thing is like, so he might be like in the 250 range, like the Jerry Hughes range. But the thing about Ebiketie, and we talk about Brandon Beane loving traits. Ebiketie's got long arms, huge wingspan, and that's what attracted Brandon Beane to Gregory Rousseau, is the fact that Gregory Rousseau could disengage from people and keep people off of his body with his long arms. So a guy like Ebiketie could be on the Bills' radar because of his long arms. So I wouldn't discount that. Steve Lynn coming in saying, could you see Edmonds get traded with a pick and we draft a linebacker in the first round? I'm going to say no. I think the Buffalo Bills are pretty well, despite the fact that I disagree, because I don't think that we should be pumping that much money into the linebacker position. I would rather reset there. I don't want to give Tremaine Edmonds a second contract. I think the Buffalo Bills have every plan and every want to give Tremaine Edmonds a second contract. I don't see him going anywhere. So let's take that off the table for today. That's a conversation that we are more than welcome to have on another day. You look at the Buffalo Bills roster, Tremaine Edmonds, Matt Milano are going to be your two guys whenever you're playing in that nickel. You have AJ Klein under contract for another year. Tyler Matakevich, why am I blanking on his first name? Andre Smith, Joe Giles Harris, and Tyrell Dodson is an ERFA. What are we looking for at the linebacker position, Dave? What are you looking for at the linebacker position? And is there anybody in Mobile that's caught your eye so far?
Okay, so what I'm looking for at the linebacker position for this particular year is versatility. And the reason I say that is because what does the future hold for Tremaine Edmonds? He's clearly going to be here in 2022 playing out that fifth year option. But beyond 2022, are the Bills ready to have the Bills made their mind up, like you said, that he's going to be in their plans beyond 2022? Or are they still maybe not dipping their toe all the way in yet? So that's why when I'm looking for versatility at linebacker, I want the Bills to have options, right? I want them to like maybe look at players who, if developed or if put in the right situation, maybe could take over the middle linebacker role from Tremaine Edmonds. Or maybe that's not an option and like AJ Klein's no longer in the mix. Maybe someone who can fill in a strong side linebacker. Will linebacker is not something I think, or weak side linebacker is not something I think that's like going to be a huge priority for the Bills in the draft, given that they have Matt Milano and he's under contract and he's on the big contract. So I guess for me, I'm looking for someone who will be more of that sort of strong side, middle linebacker type flex, similar to like a Nick Bolton from last year that we liked. And so that's the type of player I'm looking for. And the guy that really stands out to me who really could play, I think, all three linebacker positions on the Bills the way they're currently constructed, and the guy that I'm like having a huge draft crush on right now is why am I just tweeted about him? Chad Muma is the guy that is standing out to me right now. Now, I don't know how his practices have been at the Senior Bowl, but I know that watching some of the Wyoming games today, I went back and watched a couple of the Wyoming games from this past year. That dude is just a monster. Had over 140 tackles this year for Wyoming. Athletic, can rush the passer, can cover. He's only about 240-ish pounds, so he maybe wouldn't be the stoutest against the run. But man, the dude is a baller. He's a player, and I've really been excited watching him. So
football powerhouse, Wyoming.
Charles G comes
powerhouse, Wyoming.
Charles G comes in and says if Dean or Lloyd is there, they would not be interested. I'm going to say no. And I'm going to say if the Buffalo Bills do pull the trigger on Nakobe Dean or Devin Lloyd at pick number 25, that tells you what they think about Tremaine Edmonds' future beyond his 5th year extension. And that probably tells you that Tremaine Edmonds is not going to get a second contract. If you're going to use that resource of the 25th overall pick, the rate at which we play nickel defense and the rate at which most teams in the NFL play nickel defense now, I'm not saying we can't invest a day 2 pick. We can invest a day 2 pick in a linebacker to hedge our bets against Tremaine Edmonds or to add a little bit more of a different variety to our defense, maybe upgrade from AJ Klein. I just don't know if you're going to want to use those resources at pick number 25. What do you think, Randy, about the Bills' future here at linebacker? Where do you think they go?
So, a couple things first. Greg Tom said I am not, so capologist is not my subtitle.
Mm-hmm.
But just giving a quick peruse of Over the Cap, AJ Klein's post-June 1st,
gotta go.
His dead cap is $400K, and it saves us $5 million.
He's got to go.
So he gone. And then
most people,
Tyler Matakevich is $750 dead cap, and his cap savings is 2.5. So he gone too.
I made this comment a couple of shows ago, Randy. Like, NFL teams don't pay depth linebackers that much money. They don't pay special teams linebackers that much money. Those cap hits are absolutely asinine. Now, most people will come and say, well, they're good players. Give them an extension. If I'm the Buffalo Bills, Andre Smith is a guy you trade a 7th-round draft pick for. Tyrell Dodson is a UDFA that you clearly love. You've kept on the active roster for a while now. And you have Joe Giles-Harris, a guy who's played in the National Football League. Those are fine depth linebackers. And for the fact that you only play 2 linebackers majority of the time. AJ Klein and Tyler Matakevich, leaders, veterans, etc., they got to go because that's just not good roster construction, in my opinion. Even if you extend them, even with an extension, bringing that cap number down, it's still too much. None of our linebackers beyond Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds should be making over 1.5. None.
Yeah. So,
and also linebackers are churn and burn, right? Like
Dodson is so young too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could give him a 3 or 4 year low level deal, and he won't even be sniffing 30 by the time he's done with this deal. So as far as draft assets, that was kind of a side note. But as far as the draft goes, I got 2 guys that I would have my eye on. One we've mentioned before with Damone Clark out of LSU.
Yep.
You know, he's been getting some pretty good reviews this week. Linebackers as a whole have not been you haven't been hearing a whole lot of on the broadcast or in a lot of the articles, but I've been hearing some good things about Damone Clark. And the other one that we haven't really talked about that I wanted to touch on today is another guy from my Cincinnati Bearcats, Darian Beavers, the 6'4", 255-pound versatile linebacker that you could start in a sub role as a rusher. And when you're not in nickel, you could start in that AJ Klein role. And again, that brings that cap hit down. You're paying him a rookie deal in the 2nd or 3rd round. And then if you decide that you don't want to re-up Tremaine Edmonds, you can slide him over to the middle. And you've got him there for another 3 to 4 years, depending on, you know, how you do the extension. And what I wanted to point out is that, you know, you can read the whole write-up on TDN about Beavers, but the versatility aspect in which it says that he offers value in zone coverage, defending the run, and rushing the passer. He has experience as Mike, Sam, and Will in both odd and even fronts, and he's proven to be an interchangeable defender with experience in 4 phases of special teams. Pro comp is Zaven Collins, and the write-up was done by Joe Marino, 2nd round value. So Beavers is a guy, if I'm the Bills, and I'm not quite sure if Tremaine Edmonds is going to be the long-term investment. I'm looking at the cap situation. Beavers is a guy that I look at and think that is where I can go to hedge my bets and think long-term.
Yeah, I'm with you on Beavers. And the other guy that I'm with you in that type of situation, that role, is Troy Anderson from Montana.
Yeah.
A little bit more of a project, but this is a guy who at Montana played running back, played quarterback, and then they transitioned him to defense. All types of athleticism from Troy Anderson, who's popped in a bunch of people's minds this week. I'm a big fan of Terrell Bernard from Baylor, who I think Sean McDermott would probably fall in love with when he puts the tape on, knowing he comes from a Dave Aranda defense. I'm a big fan of Brian Asamoah from Oklahoma, who's getting some rave reviews too. But Asamoah and Terrell Bernard are weak side linebackers. I think you're spot on there, Randy, with we need a strong side backer, some bigger, more physical guy who also still has athleticism. Go find yourself a freak like Tremaine Edmonds as well at the linebacker position. Troy Anderson and Chad Muma, Darian Beavers all fit that role as guys who can come in, slide in for AJ Klein, and maybe if we need to, can help us hedge our bets with Tremaine Edmonds. And Kendall Mursky talked about this. Me and Kendall were having a conversation about what we wanted at the linebacker position. And he said just another guy who could make us play more base, a guy who can come in and give us a little pass rush oomph from the linebacker position. And Darian Beavers, as you mentioned, seems like that kind of guy. And I know Kendall loves that Cincinnati Bearcats defense. So I'm going to have to get, we're going to have to get Kendall's opinion on.
We got breaking news.
Yeah. What we got here?
Breaking news. Jacksonville Jaguars are hiring Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winning head coach, to be their next head coach.
Oh, that franchise.
The quarterback guru, Doug Peterson, got the most out of Nick Foles and Carson Wentz, will now be mentoring Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, that's
what could possibly go wrong?
Oh boy.
It's better than Urban Meyer.
Yeah. They could, in all honesty, like a franchise can do worse than Rick Spielman and Doug Peterson, which they're bringing in Spielman over top. But just like Shad Khan's inability to fire Trent Baalke when his guy, Byron Leftwich, said, I don't want to work with this general manager. I want my guy. Shad Khan refusing to fire Trent Baalke, who was literally just Urban Meyer's mouthpiece, is just fucking asinine. Absolutely asinine. Just they were almost my jabronis of the week this week, but I went with the Pro Bowl instead. But let's transition now to the defensive backfield. And obviously all off season it was, do the Bills need all-purpose running back? Do the Bills need another starting wide receiver? Do the Bills need two guards? The Bills need this, the Bills need that. And off to the wayside went CB2 with how Levi Wallace played, with how Dane Jackson stepped in. Trey White obviously will be back eventually, but that Kansas City game, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce reared its ugly head, and the Bills, when they've played some of these high power offenses this year, have struggled. And it seems like for most fans, bendy edge rusher, guy who can finish, guy who actually has sack production, and a number 2 cornerback, specifically a number 2 cornerback with a high ceiling, size, speed, seems to be on the Buffalo Bills fans' wish list. What are your guys' thoughts? Where do you place CB2? Where do you place CB2 in your list of needs for this football team? And would you rather draft a guy in the first or second round, or would you rather save that draft capital for other positions and retain Levi Wallace? What do you think, Randy?
Cornerback 2 is my number 1 position on the board. My number 1 player overall for Buffalo is Sauce Gardner. Period. Stop. End of story. I think it's a vital position to upgrade. Levi Wallace is a fine player. Nothing wrong with Levi Wallace on the surface. But if you have a chance to upgrade and create 2 premier players on the outside, you should. You absolutely should. So for me, adding a premier CB2 is vital. It is absolutely important to do that. We didn't do it last year when we had a shot at ASJ. Okay. There are enough corners in this draft to do it. We may not get Sauce in the first round at 25 unless we move up. But getting a guy like Kobe Bryant, who has equated himself well this week, and he's a bigger guy, but being very sticky in his drills. Roger McCreary, who we've comped to as a Tre'Davious White style guy, could very well be in the cards for us. Some of the other guys, Tariq Woolen is very intriguing as, possibly a second or third round guy at 6'3" and 3/8, and he ran 22.45 miles per hour today, the fastest clock speed on the field. So there's plenty of guys. Darion Kendrick is another one, the guy from Georgia and Clemson. I mean, there's tons of players in this draft that you could see. We've talked about Martin Emerson before. He's not at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
Kaiir Gordon, Andrew Booth. I mean, there's a bunch of guys.
The only first round pick in Mobile is Roger McCreary, and the fucking bullshit chatter is already starting. He's high cut, he's got short arms, he's too small.
Not worried about it.
He's gonna be a nickel. Do you want to draft? The bullshit conversation is already starting. I loved it when Chris Trapasso, because I didn't have the balls. I loved it when Chris Trapasso had the balls to comp him to Trey White. He is going to go at the back end of the first round because teams are going to overthink it. And he's probably going to be one of the best corners in this draft, if not the best corner in this draft. Roger McCreary is an absolute stud. Mm-hmm. I know Pro Anth has fallen in love with him. I know Eric Turner has fallen in love with this dude. I mean, he is patient. He's got great footwork. He's got loose hips. He's got everything you are looking for in a corner, except for he's not. And this is where Bills fans might start to lose their love or their luster or their shine for Roger McCreary. He's not built like Sauce. He doesn't have the athleticism of Kaiir. So Bills fans are gonna go and they're gonna want the traits. And Brandon Beane typically falls for the traits. So I think a guy like Roger McCreary could slip to the Buffalo Bills at 25. And man, would that be a fucking mistake for every other team in the National Football League. And if you're the Buffalo Bills, depending on who else is on the board, like I did a mock today and it was Chris Olave and it was Roger McCreary and I was losing sleep over who to pick, I went with McCreary. I really wouldn't hesitate if a guy like Roger McCreary is on the board for the Buffalo Bills. What are your thoughts on the CB2 position here, Dave?
Well, it feels like deja vu yet again, right? Because we're back in the same position we were. We're back in the same position we were last year, having the same conversation. Randy made the point, and I made the same point last year. If you have a chance to have two premier corners, one on a rookie contract and one that is Tre'Davious White on TBD when he comes back, but you don't pass up that opportunity. Look at how the Bills held up in coverage early in the KC game, and look how it fell apart late. Mm-hmm. Look how the Bengals held up in coverage. Everyone thinks the story of that game was the pass rush, but in reality, they were rushing three guys and the coverage was holding up on the back end in the second half of that game. You need to have another premier player on the boundary if you're the Bills, and I will go to the well again on it again this year like I was for ASJ last year, and I will say spend early draft capital on a corner and don't think twice about it. And so Randy already mentioned a few names, but a couple of the other names that I had on my list were Mario Goodrich from Clemson, and Cam Taylor-Britt is a guy that's standing out for me from Nebraska. Played a ton of games, 40 games in his time at Nebraska. Good fit for a zone-heavy scheme for Kyle Krabs right up on TDN. And the dude is an absolute willing and sound and fundamental tackler, which we know is a huge, it was a huge concern for us in some instances. He's got 5 picks, 22 passes defended, and 4 forced fumbles in his career. He's just an all-around solid football player. So if you're out on guys like McCreary or Kaiir Gordon are not available for you in the first round, guys like Cam Taylor-Britt, right, are going to be available. Mario Goodrich are going to be available on day 2, most likely.
Kobe Bryant.
Those could be guys Kobe Bryant could be guys that you end up going after. I mean, obviously I mentioned on Twitter, I like Delonte Taylor too. He's a little more raw, but former wide receiver. So he's new to the position. So you like that ball of clay somewhat. But if you want a solid guy off the bat, and you're not going to get McCreary or Gordon, look no further than Cam Taylor-Britt, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you look at these corners, Cam Taylor-Britt, Kobe Bryant, Mario Goodrich, Cam Taylor-Britt,
Yep.
Kobe Bryant are guys that I'm seeing over and over and over again from the various different, draft Twitter community people as guys who are standing out in practices. Mario Goodrich has that Joe Marino stamp of approval. Joe Marino is in Mario Goodrich's corner. Big fan of
I
him.
am.
And Tariq Woolen, Randy mentioned Bruce Feldman's freakless, 6'3", 215
Yeah,
pounds.
he's a freak.
He's like a 4.3 40 guy. He ran 22 miles per hour. Randy mentioned today. He's a ball of clay. Obviously went to UTSA. Alante Taylor is that ball of clay. Josh Williams, who you might be able to get in the
Woolen was a
fifth.
former receiver too, wasn't he?
Yes.
2 years removed from playing receiver.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's only been playing corner 2 years.
He played receiver in college, right?
Josh Williams from Fayetteville State is a guy when we get into the game I'm going to be looking for. Gives me Kevin Johnson vibes. Like he's a bigger, taller guy, a little bit more upright. I'm going to look at Josh Williams is a guy I think the Bills could look at and see a lot of Kevin Johnson. The Bills loved Kevin Johnson when they signed Kevin Johnson. They thought they had to steal there. I think the Buffalo Bills could see a lot of Kevin Johnson and Josh Williams out of Fayetteville State. And obviously, again, another Penn State guy. This is later on in the draft. Tariq Castro Fields is getting a lot of people's attention as well. All right, Randy, you said you wanted to get to these two comments from Waterfall. So I'm going to let you address these comments here. He comes in, he says, we literally had the pass coverage to guard KC multiple times, but the D-line was too slow and can't finish their sacks. All our sacks are coverage sacks. We need to get someone fast on the D-line to finish the QB and get rid of Hughes and Mario. What were your thoughts on those comments there, Randy?
So I agree in principle what he's saying. However, I think after – and I mentioned it on a mock draft that I did, after multiple years of investing in edge players, Epinesa and Basham and Rousseau, and who knows what they're going to turn out to be. But I really feel like in the window that we're in, it's necessary to make the move to try and buy an edge instead of drafting one this year. If they want to spend money on the interior defensive tackle market in the draft, that's fine. But as much as I like talking about these guys, I think it would be better for our immediate future is if Bean takes some of the cap savings that he gets from releasing some of our veterans that we have now and going to buy an edge. Don't ask me who it's going to be because I'm not sure. But I think like we should buy the edge, draft the corners, and draft a linebacker. That would be my approach. Buy the edge, draft. Yeah, we got needs at all three phases of the defense. What's the easiest one to replace via the draft, right? Secondary. Defensive line arguably is the hardest to replace in the draft because there is a huge learning curve.
And I would also add to that it seems like the secondary is where the Bills, like we've said so many times, can get the most out of the talent they have between Levi Wallace, Dane Jack. Like they've been able to scrape every last ounce of production out of guys that are undrafted or late round picks. So I agree with you, Randy. Like the Bills' propensity for, I mean, let's face it, they've made a lot of investments in the defensive line in the draft early over the past 2-3 years between Oliver, Basham, Epinesa, and Rousseau. And there hasn't been really one sack artist out of that entire group yet, right? Yet, I say, because there could be. Get the immediate production. I'm with you. I think I'm with you on this, Randy. Get the immediate production in free agency.
And, Silas Whittle comes in and says, we can afford to take a high ceiling DB prospect. Frazier McDermott can coach that player up. We can afford to shop for that edge in New Orleans. I believe he's referring to possibly trying to make a trade, free up some cap space for the New Orleans Saints, and trying to go out and get yourself a Cam Jordan. Another popular name you're going to see is Chandler Jones. I personally think Chandler Jones is a little washed. He had 5.5 sacks in his first game, and then he only had about 5 sacks the next 16 games. But he still did have a pretty decent pressure rate. But most fans here in Arizona are ready and done with Chandler Jones. Jadeveon Clowney. Yeah.
That's 5 more sacks than the majority of our defensive line got the entire year.
This is true.
Gonna say it.
This is true. But Jadeveon Clowney, Charles Harris, My favorite of the class would probably be Emmanuel Agba. I think that
Yeah.
he was my
Yep.
guy. He
Couple
was my
years ago,
guy
we
2
wanted
years
him.
ago.
Yeah.
We wanted him to replace Shaq. The Buffalo Bills didn't pull the trigger. I think if he lands in the right situation, Emmanuel Agba can be to a certain team that takes him. All right, I'm just gonna go. If the Buffalo Bills sign Emmanuel Agba, I think that he could be our version of Trey Hendrickson and what Trey Hendrickson is doing in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
We were both on the Trey Hendrickson train last year. Everyone's like, well, he's not the big name. He's not the splashy name. He's had like a couple of years of decent production. He had Cam Jordan across from him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Bengals, they ponied up, they paid for him, he produced. I think Agba could be this year's Trey Hendrickson, where a guy where he lands in the right situation, he could have himself a heck of a season if he's on a team. Daniil Hunter is another name that you could possibly look for in the trade market.
And if they
well.
get Agba, Josh Allen can pick him up at the airport.
I don't get it.
He was the one that Josh ran over in Miami.
What? I still don't get it. You lost me on that one. I don't know.
Sorry. Yeah, when Josh stiff armed the guy on his back in Miami, that was Agba. One of them was Agba. One of those runs was Agba.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Poor Emmanuel.
Obscure reference.
Yeah. I just didn't understand why he would pick him up to apologize, maybe.
It's okay, Randy. I followed.
Yeah. Just bad memories, man. Bad memories.
Yeah. Every once in a while,
it was just a joke because they clearly didn't have a great. They didn't clearly didn't have the friendliest of encounters the last time they met each other.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand now. All right. I still don't get it, but I'm okay. I'm gonna pretend like I get it. I'm slow sometimes. This hat is cutting off the circulation in my brain. Speaking of cutting off the circulation in my brain, I'm in love with the safety in this draft, and everyone's gonna hate me for it. But let's switch now and transition to safety, where Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, they're both now 30 on the other side of 30. They're going to be expensive. Who knows if we can afford them into the future? Even though I think Hyde's got 2 years left in his deal, Poyer's deal is up, or it could be vice versa. Jaquan Johnson, I think, is a special teamer at this point in his career. Josh Thomas is a guy I think the Bills really like in terms of development. DeMar Hamlin is a guy I think the Buffalo Bills really like in terms of development, but those are low ceiling UDFA late round guys. There's a thick dime in this draft that I'm digging, and his name is Jalen Petrie, a guy that played in that Dave Aranda defense at Baylor. He was a strong side linebacker, a Sam linebacker under Matt Rule when Matt Rule was there. He played the star role in that Dave Aranda defense. He could play safety. He could play nickel. He could play a little bit of linebacker. He lays the boom. He hasn't allowed, a single touchdown in coverage in his career in college football. Like, Jalen Petrie is stealing the show, and he is that kid from Baylor. He is stealing the show in Mobile, and I think he's a guy. Speaking of, here's another guy who could be working his way into the first round conversation. He might be the second best safety after Kyle Hamilton. So this is a situation where this is a guy but I'm struggling to find a need, right? Like, maybe those games where Saran Neal comes in for Teron Johnson, it's Jalen Petrie comes in. Maybe there is a situation where you're grooming him behind Poyer and Hyde because you're worried that you're going to lose Jordan Poyer. Like, I'm struggling personally to figure out how the Buffalo Bills will utilize him, but I just love the player so much. Dave, what are your thoughts on the safety position in general? And any guys standing out to you in Mobile?
Look, I struggle with this because I see how the Bills have handled the safety position since McDermott got here. And it's basically been Micah Hyde was like their first, quote, splash free agent that they signed, right? When McDermott got here, it was like a 5-year, $25 million, whatever it was, right? Part-time player in Green Bay, had some potential, had some good ball skills, and the Bills took a chance like he's going to be our free safety. Jordan Poyer, coming off the major injury with Cleveland, took a chance on him, ended up being a diamond in the rough. Both of those guys attained and now barely come off the field as your 2 starting guys in tandem. So I struggle to figure out how the Bills should approach this position when it comes to the draft, because they haven't really had to worry about this position, to be perfectly frank. Like they drafted Jaquan Johnson and they drafted DeMar Hamlin, but both late guys, like you mentioned. We saw Dean Marlowe walk out the door, go get that contract with the Lions. So what do the Bills do for the future of this position? Because it's no longer now like, okay, well, we don't have to worry about Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer because they're here, but like, how much longer are they going to be here? Are they going to play into their mid to late 30s with the Bills, or are they not? And so you have to start trying to figure out where is your point of attack when you finally go after a safety through the draft. Is it this year? I don't think it is, but I do like guys like Petrie, like you mentioned. I do think that there are guys like Castro Fields. No, actually, he's a corner. Sorry, I take that back. I do like guys like Petrie. I do like guys that have some versatility again, to where like maybe you don't know exactly where they're going to play right away, but maybe they could fill different roles like a DeMar Hamlin. So I don't know, maybe guys like Sterling Weatherford fit that bill. I don't know, right? Like I just struggle with this position so much because I keep coming back to like these mock drafts and I never take a safety early. It's always late. And it's just like one of those things I fall into the trap. So maybe I need to expand my horizons and start thinking about the future more, but I just can't bring myself to do it.
I can see the Bills falling in love with a lot of these end of the draft safeties and just bringing in some more competition. I mean, Damari Mathis from Pittsburgh, corner safety flex, JT Woods, another Baylor guy. Joseph Kirby probably worked himself into a day 2 pick. He's a guy to keep an eye on from Illinois. Tycene Anderson from Toledo, Yusuf Corker from Kentucky. I mean, there are a bunch of dudes the Buffalo Bills could fall in love with that are going to be going in the middle to the late rounds of the draft, but we've already got so many of those dudes, like in Josh Thomas and in Jaquan Johnson and DeMar Hamlin. So I feel like if they're going to pull the trigger, it needs to be at least on day 2. Randy, what are your thoughts on the future of the safety position here and what the Bills do this year and how they address it in the draft, if they address it in the draft this year?
So, I mean, obviously Petrie is a nice story. He's going to be the big name this week in the safety market. Honestly, I think that the way that McDermott and Frazier designed this defense, the way that they coach their safeties, is that they're going to put value on somebody who's in the system that can slide in once a Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer moves on. And that, in my opinion, is going to be DeMar Hamlin, who seems to be very much on the positive side of his teammates and coaches in Buffalo. And I think they have a plan for him eventually. If you want to slide over and take a look at money, so Micah Hyde, if they were to move on this year, and I'm not saying that they will, but if they were, you would net $5 million by cutting him post June 1st. Poyer is a little bit less. You'd be getting about 3.5 if you were to move on from Poyer. And coming off an all-pro season, I can't imagine that they would. And I really don't think they're going to move on from Hyde either. But if they did, if they feel a cap crunch and they feel like they can maybe replace Hyde with Hamlin and not lose a lot there and save $5 million, that's what I'd be looking at. Again, don't think it's really going to happen, but if we're talking about options, I think that's where we are. And then in the draft, you're talking about low-end assets, 5th, 6th, 7th round UDFAs, people that are just, as you said, going to just be dudes and not much else.
And Steve Lynn comes in and says, or draft a tall and smart corner in the later rounds and make them a safety. Both Poyer and Hyde are former corners. And this is why Riley Moss broke my goddamn heart this season, going back to Iowa. Dude was a senior, and he's going back to Iowa to be a super senior. Riley Moss would have been a perfect pick somewhere between rounds 4 and round 7, went to Iowa. And honestly, Riley Moss, if someone in an NFL front office has any common sense, they are going to draft Riley Moss and they are going to move him to safety, just like the Buffalo Bills moved Micah Hyde to free safety. I know they went to the same college. I'm not scouting the helmet. I really do think Riley Moss reminds me a lot of Micah Hyde. And I think Riley Moss next year could be on the Bills' radar. Dan Kikit mentions Bubba Bolden. He's obviously not at the Senior Bowl, but he is a, guy you can move back into center field. Good athlete. His stock actually tumbled. USC transfer to Miami, but Sean McDermott and Manny Diaz are tight. Bubba Bolden's been playing under Manny Diaz for 2 years at Miami. So a guy like Bubba Bolden's definitely going to be on the Buffalo Bills radar late if they can get the stamp of approval from Manny Diaz. Andy Larson comes in and says Tariq Woolen is one of those guys that could possibly move to safety. Possibly have to see him as a tackler. Maybe even
Mathis too, right? I mean,
Kobe Bryant, Damari Mathis. Yeah. I think Damari Mathis is practicing this week as a safety.
Yeah. He is.
And I think that a guy like Kobe Bryant might be able to fill into that role as well. All right. Well, special teams is really the only thing left. Jake Camarda, my boy from Georgia, is really the only name worth mentioning. Watching him at the Senior Bowl, the punt god Matarazzi is not at the Senior Bowl, San Diego State guy. So unfortunate for all the punt god fans in the comment section. But Jake Camarda is the guy I'll be watching from Georgia at the Senior Bowl. Before we head out, gentlemen, there are just 3 guys on offense I want to mention that we mentioned a little bit on Tuesday's show. I want to make sure we mention them again. Number 1 is Calvin Austin. Go out and find yourself a man who can do everything. Calvin Austin, to me, Russ Brown from Cover 1 compared him to Tyler Gabriel. I think he's got a higher ceiling than Taylor Gabriel. He's a guy I think can come in. He can do what Isaiah McKenzie can do in the slot. I think he can do what Cole Beasley can do in the slot. I think he gives you options deep down the field as well. He can do the jet sweep stuff. He can do the return game stuff. I think Calvin Austin, and I was tempted to move him from the 3rd round to the 2nd round on my draft board, the way he's blowing up Mobile, because Calvin Austin's having himself a week. But I had to stop myself. This is one of those situations where I got to stop myself. And just because I love a guy doesn't mean I have to overdraft them. I'm keeping him in the 3rd round. And I think the size is what's going to keep a guy like Calvin Austin in the 3rd round. But if Calvin Austin's sitting there in the 3rd round, or the Buffalo Bills are within 10, 15 picks and they think that they can trade up, go get yourself Calvin Austin. Go get yourself a slot corner who can do just about everything. He can do a combination of what Cole and Isaiah and all of these guys can do. So big on Calvin Austin. Lacita Smith from Virginia Tech. Russ Brown was talking to him in the locker room. He said point blank, like, what teams have shown the most interest in you? He said the Cleveland Browns and the Buffalo Bills. He flat out said the Buffalo Bills have been all up his rear end, and the Buffalo Bills, as Dean Kindig, a guy who we're going to have on the show next week, has said, have been to Virginia Tech a lot this year. So is it Lacita Smith? Is it Brock Hoffman? Is it Trey Turner? Is it Amari Barno? Like, is it Jermaine Waller, the corner? Who is it at Virginia Tech that the Buffalo Bills seem to really have their eye on? Dean really does seem it's Lacita's. And Lacita's mentioned just how much he's like, man, I talked to the Bill scouts and they had done their homework on me. Like, they knew all about me. They were asking these questions. So it seems
it's
like
an easy connection.
Yeah, it's an easy connection. Again, I think he'll be on the board starting in the 3rd round for the Buffalo Bills. Short arms, which is what scared me away. And they mentioned that, like, for all the things he does well, he gets caught up a little bit because of his short arms. So something to think about. And then last but not least, can't end this show without mentioning the killer week that Zion Johnson has had. He could play all 5 offensive line positions. They got him playing center this week. He says, I want to be prepared in the National Football League to play any position. He was the last one off the field. He's showing his length. He's going toe-to-toe with guys like Travis Jones this week. He's having an awesome week. So I think that Zion Johnson is very much on the Buffalo Bills board at 25, a guy who can come in and he can push a guy like Ryan Bates to be the starting left guard right away. Maybe he comes in and he can start at left guard, and Ryan Bates can swap over to right guard, and you can get a post June 1st cap saving with a guy like Darrell Williams. So I really do think that, a guy like Zion Johnson is going to be high on the Bills boards. Charles G comes in and says, any Jelani Woods news? I don't know, man. The Shrine Bowl is on right now. Joe Marino's been talking about how he's been tearing up the Shrine Bowl practices. I'm actually, when this show is over, going to go heat myself up some leftovers and watch the Shrine Bowl. And someone mentioned Kyle Phillips, the slot receiver out of UCLA. I'm going to go keep my eye on him as well when I watch the Shrine Bowl. But ladies and gentlemen, that should just about do it for us this evening. Randy, any parting thoughts here as we head out?
No, I mean, it's that favorite, one of my favorite times of year. I think this is a lot of fun to kind of talk and just, remember all these mock drafts and everything that we do. They're all just thought exercises as far as possibilities and different scenarios. So don't take them too seriously. And for anyone in the comments, please don't send any, nasty comments or anything about them. Just take them as a grain of salt, which is what they're meant to be. But no, a great time of year. I enjoy being on, guys, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Dave, any final thoughts before we head out?
Just echo some of what Randy said. Mock drafts are really there to give you a sense of feel of like really more about what guys and what positions are going to be sort of at least in the range of where you think they're going to be. It's nothing more than, like Randy said, a thought exercise, and it's for fun, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. That's what makes the draft so much fun, because it's one of the least predictable things we've got when it comes to the NFL and things like that. So it's really fun. And maybe the Bills, after missing out on Landon Dickerson and Creed Humphrey, do look at Zion Johnson and say, we're not going to miss out on him.
Not
So
twice.
we will see. But
But
no.
they also have to remember that they missed out on ASJ and draft a corner.
Oh God, yeah.
We do. They do stand to save a ton of money by cutting both guards. Like Williams nets you a bunch of money, and Feliciano nets you a bunch of money. So, I tend to think that guard is probably going to be high up there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they address it in free agency too.
And Bates is young, so re-signing him is a serious possibility.
Yeah, because like you give Darrell Williams some money, you cut Darrell Williams, and you it's not an insignificant money you're swallowing. You cut just John Feliciano, it's not insignificant money you're swallowing, and then you have to go and pay a free agent too. So if they do cut both those guys, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they cut Feliciano early and then held off on Darrell Williams till they made sure they draft a guy. It'll be interesting to see how they swing that. But ladies and gentlemen, until next time, if you're watching this live, before you head out, smash that like button. If you're watching this on demand, thank you for making it through the entire hour and 47 minutes here. Make sure that you're leaving comments in the comment section, and we will make sure to get back to you over the course of the week. And if you are listening in audio form, make sure that you give us a nice review and a 5-star. Remember, next week, Monday, we're going to have Russ Brown, Cover One Draft Podcast, on to recap everything that he saw in Mobile. We will break down everything we saw in Mobile. And on Thursday, we will have Dean Kindig from the Bills Mafia blog sitting here telling us every prospect that the Buffalo Bills have been scouting and how we need to be starting to set up our boards, and some of the prospects that maybe the Buffalo Bills have had their eye on. So we should be possibly keeping a closer eye on or more attention to. So we got Russ, we got Dean next week. The draft coverage continues. The off-season coverage continues here on the Cover One Sports Network and the Air Raid Hour. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Go Bills.